Londonderry has been the closest it gets nowadays to being gay in the warm days leading up to August the 12th. Tomorrow, 30,000 or more Protestants from all over Northern Ireland descend on the city. They're the Apprentice Boys, an organisation commemorating with a march and an initiation ceremony the day that 13 young apprentices defied the governor and closed the city's gates to King James's invading army over 200 years ago. In more normal times, the march is a festival and a tourist attraction. This year, Londonderry awaits the coming of the Apprentice Boys with fear in its heart. And there have been private meetings between the organisers of the Apprentice Boys and the Catholics, a liaison unheard of here in 2 centuries.
The Apprentice Boys of Derry in their sashes and bowler hats marched proudly behind a variety of bands, all pounding out their patriotic tunes.
Most of the thousands who came to the city for the march went home last night, leaving the streets to the police and the stone throwers who started it all.
With this much hatred about, peace seems a forlorn hope. The fight took on a pattern. From the police point of view, it was a containing action to stop hooligans from Bogside from breaking out and spreading the rioting to other parts of the city. From the top of the flats, the Bogsiders had the clear advantage of height for their hail of rocks and petrol bombs.
At the border between Donegal and Londonderry, Irish Army trucks have moved into position during the night. But the infantrymen they carry are under orders to give what help they can to injured Catholics brought over the border from the fighting in Londonderry. And the army has said that there's no question of crossing into Northern Ireland to retrieve injured people. But so far there's been no sign of injured fighters coming over in any number. But women and children are crossing the border in increasing numbers. At Buncrana in Donegal, the parochial hall has been turned into a reception centre for them.
Well, we're just frightened. If we don't leave it, we'll be in Grantia.
Who are you frightened of?
The police and the beammen and the Paisleys.
Did you come on your own?
No, my sister-in-law's husband brought us down.
And who did you leave behind you?
A husband, 2 sons, one 17 and the other's 20.
And what are they doing?
Fighting away up there with them, with the police and the beammen. Doing, what do you call them again? Petrol bombs.
Petrol bombs? Well, the soldiers are here now. What do you think about it?
Well, I don't mind the soldiers so much because at least we know that they're not partial. They're impartial.
That's for sure.
Is this an end to the petrol bombs?
Yes. Oh, yes, as long as the soldiers are there.
Your men are now standing round barricades in the streets. Under what circumstances will they move into the Bogside?
I have no orders on that aspect at all.
They're carrying guns. Under what circumstances will they shoot?
They will only shoot in extremis, which is in the can be interpreted generally in the protection of life.
How many men have you in Londonderry?
Approximately 500.
Do you think this is enough to handle the situation?
As it is at the present, yes.
As a final question, Colonel, your men are carrying banners which they're keeping rolled up. What do these banners say?
This is the normal banner which British troops always carry on internal security operations, and the gist of what they say is disperse or we will fire. This is a warning which has, by law, to be given before we can even think of opening fire.
They will fire to kill?
Yes.
Initially, the troops were welcomed in, even at the Bogside. I do recollect they were cheered and welcomed in. But it was only really a few weeks later when the whole thing just kicked off again and the troops were attacked. So at that point, I realised, well, this is not going to work. It's not something that's going to be handled by just sheer force.
And lining up in battle formation across the street where the air was foul with smoke and tear gas.
They complained there was...
In amongst this being scared and being dangerous, you were still, this is what I signed up to do. Nobody had been trained to do, you know, civil disorder policing in basically what was developing into a very nasty, dirty civil war.
To be truthful, I thought it would have been over in 4 or 5 years. But the situation deteriorated and then it just dragged on.
I was shot at in the markets. There was an £800 bomb went off outside the Grand Central Hotel. That blew me up the street.
There's no doubt that the army, the military, made mistakes. Internment was a terrible mistake in my mind, and I was there when internment was going on.
We didn't go out with murder in mind. We went out to protect the community from those who had murder in mind, and from that point of view, we were successful in what we did, and that success ultimately led to the space where politics could, take purchase and get a better hold.
You just put on your uniform and out you went, and I had to have a very understanding wife that this is what I was doing for us. So I think we've come a long way, to be truthful.
As regards the history of the RUC, the majority of the soldiers were all good and decent people trying to do a good job. You may have got in any organisation an odd bad apple, but that should not have been put down as demonising the whole force.
No thanks, sweetheart.
Right to be.
The Troubles is the name given to the period of conflict in Northern Ireland between the late 1960s and the mid-1990s. But to understand why the Troubles started, we have to go back even further in history, all the way back to 1921 when the island of Ireland was divided. Northern Ireland was created and remained part of the United Kingdom, while the rest of Ireland became an independent state. This caused a split in the population of Northern Ireland between Unionists and Nationalists. Most Unionists were Protestants and were happy to stay part of the United Kingdom. But Nationalists, the majority of whom were Catholic, wanted to join the new Irish state. Many Catholics faced discrimination in jobs and housing, and in the late 1960s began protests which faced a crackdown from the Northern Ireland government. Violent street disorder spread, and in 1969 the UK government sent troops to impose control. They were largely welcomed, but later armed groups from both sides, like the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, and the Ulster Defence Association, the UDA, began to carry out bombings and shootings. 1972 was the worst year, including Bloody Sunday, when 13 people were killed by soldiers while taking part in a civil rights march. And Bloody Friday, when 9 people were killed by IRA bombs in Belfast. In all, more than 3,500 people were killed, and more than 50,000 were injured in the conflict. Peace talks started in the early 1990s, and in 1998 the Good Friday Agreement was signed, which ended the worst of the violence.
When I seen this character and all the crowds, and they were throwing stones and petrol bombs and like everything they could do, I just got the children, grabbed them, and I run with them. Like, I'm being quite honest, to run with them, because you couldn't have done nothing else,
My mummy says to the neighbour next door, "Don't worry," she says, "it'll only be oil windows and that we'll have to put in." But when we turned the corner and we seen the houses, they were all burnt. Everything, there was all burnt, and we were just starting them. What had we run out in? I can never forget that. That was the scariest part, and then you were saying, "Oh my God, we've no house to go to, where are we going to go?" But as my mummy said, old houses, you can get another house, but you can't, nobody has another life.
It was a complete shit. Yeah. The only thing that we got out of the house was our dog, because it was in the yard at the time. We come back here on the 11th of July. 1970, 49 years back in this house now.
And like when you think we were starting in the clothes that we went out of this street that day in.
You've laid a wreath today, and obviously you served on Operation Banner. What are your overriding memories of Operation Banner and serving yourself?
Well, I think it was of the British Army doing what it does best, which is being a professional, soldiering outfit, to go and make sure that terrorists didn't intimidate the population. I remember quite a lot all the very good people, even in nationalist and Republican areas, who didn't think violence was the solution, who wanted to support good security, who helped us. That's what I sort of remember on a day like this. And I remember that overall it was a success, that when I came back in 1994, the first ceasefire happened, and there was talk about decommissioning even then, and what would the IRA do in the future. So that's what I remember today, and I remember my soldiers and the soldiers I work with who lost their lives on those tours. And I think that's what today is about. It is about celebrating the most successful, probably post-war op banner deployment we had. It ended up in a political solution, predominantly the defeat of the IRA and other terrorist organisations, and I think it was worth it.
In terms of historical allegations that some veterans are facing, you've said that those who served in Northern Ireland should not face any future probes unless new evidence comes to light. But if soldiers who served did commit crimes back then, shouldn't they go to court for it?
Well, the key is new evidence and not fishing. We've had police ombudsman's investigation that have usually proved to not have any material new evidence. We don't want ambulance chasing lawyers and fishing expeditions. What we want is, if someone has some solid new evidence, then of course, no one is above the law. We are the British Army. The values we stand for is what we go to fight around the world. And that means we uphold those values. So, look, but I think we should reflect on the tens of thousands of people who deployed an op banner. They all upheld the law, and in fact they defended those people who couldn't defend themselves. And I think that is what we should be really proud about, and we absolutely got to deal with the legacy issue. We absolutely. But every soldier I served with, we went and did the right thing and followed the law and protected people, and that's what we uphold.
What precisely are you going to do to stop veterans facing any new claims, and what about those veterans who are in the middle of court cases at the moment?
Well, the ones right now in the middle of a court case, there is an independent judiciary. We have a separation of powers between government and the law. We can look at future legislation, and right now the Northern Ireland Office and the government is looking at new legislation around the legacy. That is currently in consultation within government. So that's the first thing, and that's what we're all effectively trying to deal with. The secondly is the question of the inquest, which is actually the vast majority of what we're seeing with veterans being contacted. There's an inquest into state killings that we've seen being piled through by the Northern Ireland Attorney General, as it was then when I was the Minister, into the inquest. And we need to make sure that our veterans know their rights. I had a constituent the other day who was sent a letter by the Coroner's Service of Northern Ireland, didn't tell them their rights at all, didn't tell them they didn't have to actually respond, or they do, or what was going to happen to their data. So we have to uphold the rights of our veterans, protect them, help them in the support if they have to go to Northern Ireland, but at the same time talk about how these investigations are being conducted. Do they have to have knocks on the door in the middle of the night? I mean, some of these guys are in their 70s and 80s. What is the threshold for new evidence? All that is a discussion that we need to have, and all of that is the best way of upholding, the record that we did. But at the same time, if there has been someone who's actually broken the law and there's been real new evidence presented, then we can do something about it.
And just finally, you've not been in the job too long. Is this your top priority? And when it comes to a no-deal Brexit, are troops ready for a no-deal?
Well, on the no-deal Brexit, troops are ready. We have a pretty long record of, moving troops to task, of contingency planning. You only saw recently in Derbyshire, the Chinook helping, protect that village. That is our bread and butter as Britain's armed forces. So we are ready for Brexit. We will be able to mitigate many of the impacts that people feared. The change of government, the change in the Chancellor, I think means we're in a much stronger place to do that. Top priorities, I have, I'm afraid, a number of top priorities on my desk. One is the proper funding of the armed forces. Let's remember, we're not free. We cost a lot of money to deliver the best service in the world, to protect our shores, protect our interests abroad. And that's why I've got to make sure that in the next few weeks I have a strong conversation with both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to try and achieve that funding, so the next generation of soldier has the best kit, has the best training and support that they can when we deploy them to keep us safe, which is what we owe them at most.
You're confident the new Chancellor will give you more money for defence?
I'll do my very best to get it.
Thank you.
When I joined the Army at 16 as a boy, and I went to Northern Ireland on my first tour virtually straight after my 18th birthday, and that was my first understanding really that part of England effectively was in such a bad way. And then numerous tours after that through the ranks up to warrant officer when it was my last rank in Northern Ireland. Didn't seem to get any better. But I could see that we were obviously making a good presence, and if we weren't there, then a lot more RUC, as they were, would have been having a lot more trouble than they were actually getting.
I've reflected on a few people I knew that passed in Ireland, not because of the Troubles, but through accidents or whatever in Ireland. It's good to meet old soldiers and old friends who I've served with over many, many years. So today it's more about Ireland is a history that has good and bad points, but right now this is a good point, and it's right that it should be remembered on this 50th anniversary.
You lose people, and for maybe 20 years you don't think about them. Something like this brings it back.
What are your most vivid memories from that time?
I remember a friend called Ivy, a young policewoman trained with me. Absolutely wonderful girl, and of course she was blown up in a bomb 6 months after being married. And she's one that I wonder what her life would have been like had she lived through it.